Welcome to another episode of the TotallyTA podcast. In this episode, you'll learn how to ditch the order taking, become a strategic TA leader, and own the table. Recruiting isn't just about filling roles, it's about driving business success. We're cutting through the noise and getting real about what it takes to go from a tactical recruiter to a trusted talent advisor. We'll break down how to stop being an order taker and start influencing hiring decisions like a pro. We're talking data-backed insights, hiring manager pushback the right way, and positioning yourself as a true business partner, not just a recruiter. If you're ready to level up, challenge outdated hiring mindsets, and get a seat at the strategy table, this episode is for you. Today, I'm proud to say that we're joined by Nicole Carriere. So over to you, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I've been in talent acquisition for, 15 plus years. I've done everything from managing tech recruiting teams to helping to build out sourcing teams to most recently running an executive search team. I've worked with a variety of different companies throughout the tech world and really helped to kind of build out strategies and build out operations and processes. So I'm excited to kind of share some of that insights. Most recently in my role, a company called Procore, we grew from 900 to 4,200 employees. We went through going public. We've seen a lot. I saw a lot of different change, a lot of different things that we had challenges for. And so this really kind of strikes home on how we kind of grew and how that team itself started to move into being more that strategic advisory type team, and looking forward to kind of sharing those wins with you.
What inspired you to focus specifically on the concept of being a strategic talent advisor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that the recruiting and talent acquisition world is moving today, like, we don't want to be order takers, right? It doesn't always feel good in thinking about when you're showing up and you're going into a meeting and our hiring leaders just expecting X, Y, and Z, and we know that's not real. But how do we actually push back? And I see a lot of recruiters, there's like still a gap out there today on how do I get to that level? Like, what things do I need to bring in? And so I really want to talk about some practical things today around what you can do as a recruiter, even as a talent leader, to think about how do we shift that mindset, right? Like, and when we think about where talent acquisition is going, with AI coming into play and just the growth and the landscape, it's just so competitive. It's just so important to, I think, get ourselves to this level and let go of really what TA or even HR used to be, is kind of those paper pushers and just order takers.
As you say, TA has evolved over the last even 5, 10, 15 years. So let's define the strategic talent advisor role. What do you think it means to be a strategic talent advisor versus a traditional recruiter?
Yeah, I think it's changing your mindset of I'm just here to fill this position today. It's really moving from that reactive, I think, function into that more proactive function. So not just thinking about, yes, of course you have X amount of recs that you have to fill, but really what is your strategy around that? How can you communicate your strategy? What are you bringing to the table as far as data? If you're hitting, walls, if there's areas where we're finding gaps, how are we actually presenting that back, and how are we actually educating our hiring leaders too to help them be better hiring managers? So it's really, again, I think digging deeper and sometimes really actually slowing down, right? Like, I think we are in some cases, especially now, I think a lot of companies with all the downsizing, a lot of recruiters are doing more with less. And so that can be challenging and they can feel strapped. But how can you bring kind of your expertise to the table and really help drive that, but also help drive the kind of strategy for the company, right? And so think about how does that tie to the bigger picture of the organization? Again, rather than just focusing on, I'm just here to fill this number, I'm moving on to the next.
And that's a good point about, linking it back to businesses. Why is this shift from transactional recruiting to strategic advising important for businesses today?
As we know, most companies win or lose based on the people they have, right? Who they have but having the right people in the right seat with the right skill set. So, this term of kind of talent density, if you've heard that term in recent, Netflix kind of really pushed it out there, but thinking about, do we have quality talent that's going to help drive our business outcomes? And I think more companies are moving towards that. We're thinking about more skill-based hiring, right? And to actually have the right skills in place rather than, again, just, there's used to be this book I read a long time ago, Good to Great, and he talked a lot about having the right people on the bus in the right seat, right? And so really think about how can everyone impact. And I think companies, to have that competitive advantage nowadays, needs to start thinking in this way, is really think about how can we help drive better outcomes with the people that we're hiring.
And a lot of it is to do mindset shift as well.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key skills and competencies that make a recruiter a true talent advisor?
I think there's three kind of areas when I think about becoming kind of that mind, or what skills and mind shifts you need to think about cultivating. One is business acumen. One is thinking about your data
Yeah.
fluency or data mindset. What are you bringing to the table there? And then the third one is influencing skills and partnerships, right? So if I were to dig into each of those a little bit, think about the business acumen is really think about, like, what do you know about your business, right? Okay, I'm hiring for our sales organization. Do you understand the sales goals? Do you understand the quotas? Do you understand what it's a day in the life of the account executive you're hiring for, right? What are we trying to achieve by hiring this person, rather than just, again, it's another number that we're hiring for? So I think really understanding the business and understand the company as a whole. So even if you are in the sales org and that's what you're recruiting for, but how do I understand that partnership between what our product teams are doing or what our engineering teams are doing? So the more that you can actually come in and have a seat at the table to understand, like, the bigger picture, right? I understand where my company's going. I understand the 3-year strategy or 4-year strategy or whatever it is they have laid out is going to be even more important. And not only that will help you in selling the company to candidates, of course, and having that better understanding of where we're going and being able to represent that, but also when you come into a meeting with a hiring leader and you already have some knowledge around what they do every day, you're just going to show up as more of an expert, right? And so really being able to, like, think about that. When I think about data, I think, again, there's so many different things. And I think every probably TA team is at the evolution of where they're at in their data journey, right? There's some I think that are more robust and some that maybe not as much. But really just think about, one could be market trends, right? What are you seeing in the market? If our hiring leaders want this skill set at this location, what can we inform them about that? It is there. Maybe we don't have that skill set here, right? Or here's the type of top companies that we would look for within this market. So how are we kind of bringing that to the table? And then also all the way down to kind of pipeline analytics. Where are we seeing gaps? What have we seen in past hires for this role? What can you kind of bring to the table to bring more knowledge around your process and your strategy and how are you going to approach that? And I think those two actually really tie into that last one, which is that influencing skills, right? If you're showing up and you're saying, I understand your business, hiring leader, I understand where you're going, I understand what you need, right? And here's how we're going to get here, then that's going to be a lot easier than coming in and just asking questions, or when they push back on you, them actually respecting kind of your response or respecting your desire to change the strategy. So having those two, I think, is going to lean into that influencing skills. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And as a head of TA leader yourself, you've obviously been not only through this journey with yourself and the way
Yeah.
you have approached TA and your hiring managers over the years, but you've been through this journey, I'm assuming, with upskilling your own internal talent acquisition team. But I
Yes.
think a lot of what we're saying here today can also be applicable to external recruitment agencies as
Yeah.
well. A lot of recruitment agencies come across transactional,
Mm-hmm.
from their initial sales outreach when they're trying to win the business. And then once they've got the business over the line and they're working with the client, they're still acting transactional. Something
Yeah.
that resonated with me when you were talking there about agencies is agencies, even when they've won the business, they're working with you, they still don't take the time to understand not only the role, but your
Mm-hmm.
hiring manager's pain points, but the business goals. And then
Yeah.
they're sending mismatched CVs.
Yeah.
So
Right.
just on this, what sort of advice would you give to agency recruiters
Yeah.
that might be slightly different or the same to your
Mm-hmm.
own TA team that you've managed?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to when there was a time at my previous company where we did use agencies a lot. We just had really high hiring numbers. We had a small team. We relied on them. And the agencies that I feel like showed up the best and we had the best partnerships with and we had the best success with is those that truly partnered with us as recruiters and with the hire leaders. And so through that, again, it wasn't just about throwing people over the line to say, hey, I think this person would be good.
Yeah.
They were taking the extra step to say, this person will be good because. and this person wants this because, and really helping to prep ourselves as well in regards to being able to really understand what this candidate wanted. But also, they took a lot of our information. We took time in the beginning for them to really understand our business, understand what we're looking for, and understand how to sell it to candidates, right? So we also weren't getting candidates that come to us. And there's been times where I've had agencies, they'll send people over, and we'll start talking about kind of the role, or talking about kind of where the company is going, and they're like, oh, that's not what the agency recruiter told me, right? Like, and so those gaps are so critical from a candidate experience standpoint, from aligning with the
Yeah.
companies that you're working with, right? And so it's very, very important, I think, to take the time to understand and take these same types of things. Think about understanding the business, understanding what it is, and then also, what are you providing? How are you also keeping everyone updated? So that goes for, I think, recruiters as well as agency recruiters. How are you letting your partners that you're working with know where you're at in the process? How many people have you talked to? What does this look like? What things are we running into? What rejections are we hearing? Is it the compensation? So we worked a lot with our agency in digging into that. We would have those kind of weekly check-ins and conversations on,
Yeah.
okay, what are you hearing? Right? Here's what we're hearing on our side. Like, what else can we provide you with? Is there any other tools that we can provide you with? And so again, it really becomes that partnership. It's a two-way street. And you really feel like they're invested also in not just filling a role because they maybe get paid commission or whatever it is, but they're actually invested with that. And those, I think, agencies are the ones that will kind of stand out for sure.
Whether you're an agency recruitment consultant or an internal TA part of your team, it's about building that credibility to have that influence with the hiring managers and the business in general. So from a credibility point of view, how would you suggest, I suppose, two-part question here, how would you
Yeah.
suggest internal TA recruiters and recruitment consultants would be able to build that credibility with hiring managers and business leaders?
I think a lot of it comes down to, again, going back to understanding the business, but having clear, concise communication and being proactive, I think, is a really key.
Yeah.
Try to think a step ahead, right? Like, what is my goal when we were building out, especially our executive search function, which was a newer function for our company, and you're dealing with C-level, leaders. Try to think a step ahead of what would they want to see, right? Like, what questions are they're going to ask. I used to always tell my team, like, I don't want them coming to me asking about what's happening with the search, right? We should be already informing them. We should already be a step ahead of where they are and letting them know stuff. Thinking about, when we think of prepping for interviews, like doing actually what we used to call pre-briefs. So before you actually go into that interview, how are we making sure everyone on the panel understands what their role is, right? Owning the process and being able to understand those pieces is really critical, I think. When you think about those types of things, as you continue to show up and you own those pieces, and even owning those pieces when things fail, which is really important too, right? It can't be this back and forth between, well, that's not my fault, they should have done X, Y, and Z. And then they're thinking, well, you're the one that owned the process, right? So there's this really, how much do you own that process and own your role, whether, again, agency or whether it's your internal recruiting partner, but really think about how can you bring that expertise and show up like a subject matter expert. That's going to really, I think, go a long ways. And how you relate it back to their overall outcomes and their business goals, then you're talking more in their language, right? Think about their shoes. Put yourself in what they're trying to achieve for their team, and relate stuff back to that, because that's going to hit with them more than, again, well, we're seeing X, Y, and Z, and they don't have any idea what that means, right? So it's really important, I think, to really kind of gain that respect through that communication, through that consistent check-ins, through those being proactive is very important.
And we've all had hiring managers who have pushed back to us. And
Yeah.
I think building that foundation of credibility, influence, and respect is a good way to kind of get ahead of that pushback from hiring
Yeah.
managers. But we're never going to eliminate it completely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So could you suggest some strategies that recruiters can use to help with hiring managers who have unrealistic hiring expectations, but in a productive way?
Yeah, I think this is also where data really comes into play, and also like experience of like, okay, let's say we're hiring for this senior product manager, just throwing a title out there, right? Looking back, and hopefully maybe you have a system to help you track this, but what has been the success rate? Like, how many interviews do we normally have to make one hire, right? Helping them understand really what the process is one way, right? I also think utilizing potentially other experiences. So let's say there's another person that's hired for these types of roles. Here's the success that we saw with Mr. Joe hiring manager that I learned from. Use your experience to then lend credibility to that you own the process for this and be able to influence in that way. And there are times I think, and I've had times where I've had hiring managers that are very, very passionate about how they want to do something, and sometimes it's conceding a little bit and say, okay, we're going to start this way as long as we have the understanding that we're going to continue to revisit this process as
Yeah.
we're moving through it, right? And we've done that. But still the critical part with those times is again bringing it back to the data. Like, what are we seeing? We've now wasted, whether it's in hours of time, right? And energy of however many interviews we've already done, and maybe the alignment with what we're looking for from us, knowledge and skills and abilities standpoint is off. Like, trying to bring that back to say, okay, if we take an extra 15 minutes to dig into this, we maybe could eliminate going forward and having, again, people that are dropping out or people that are declining us. So it's really, really important, I think, to dig into those pieces and bringing it back to, again, what your knowledge is, your experience has been, and relying on the data to help influence.
Of course, knowledge and experience is one thing. When you bring it back to data and analytics, you can make smarter hiring decisions,
Yes.
and you can build that credibility even more. What would you say are the key metrics or key KPIs that recruiters should be tracking and reporting on?
I think there's a couple, pockets. One, I think every recruiter should be knowledgeable and understanding kind of market insights, right? Like, how can I pull information from the market to understand what I'm looking for, right? So market analytics, whether it be from availability, from a diversity standpoint, from a skills-based standpoint, from top companies that we would be targeting candidates from. That's one point. Then I think the other key point is pipeline analytics, right? Understanding where are we seeing dropouts, throughout our
Yeah.
process. Why are people declining us, right? How long does it take to fill these types of roles at this level, right? Obviously, filling an entry level sales role compared to filling a director of sales is going to be very, very different. And setting those expectations. Where are we actually seeing our source of hires coming from? Thinking about, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, our job board. To be honest with you, our job board was probably our lower, probably maybe fifth most recent stats that I saw in our last company in kind of where we're actually getting talent. Most of it was coming from sourcing. Most of it was coming from employee referrals. So again, that ties into too, how are you helping to engage that hiring manager and referrals and those pieces? So really understanding kind of that process and where you're coming from. And I think everyone on everyone's list is kind of diversity metrics, right? Being able to dial into that. Where are we building out our workforce? What does that kind of look like in the market, and how can we tie all of that back to
And going back to the first point about market insights and data, we as internal TA teams, we don't have the monopoly on being right or knowing that data, which is where we tend to like to rely on external recruitment agencies just for that
them?
data.
Yeah.
And I have this in my mind that 99% of agency reach out on cold email or LinkedIn messaging is always about candidates, and it's usually candidates that
Yeah.
we don't need or candidates that don't actually fit our profile. And I just believe that if agencies understood our world and our end-to-end TA process and the data that we need
Yeah.
outside of the annual salary survey, if recruitment
Hmm.
agencies understood the data that we need to prioritize vacancies or get an approval across the line with
Yep.
C-suite, they would win more business with us. They would resonate,
Hmm.
with us more. So
Yeah.
that's what I would like to see more in agency cold outreach to help
Yeah.
us in different ways outside of CV sourcing. With regards to data and reporting, how would you communicate data insights in a way that influences C-suite and leadership decisions?
I think you have to also, before you kind of like say, I'm gonna talk about this. I've seen this happen where I've had recruiters that just try to pull all this information, and we get into a hiring sink, and they're just kind of regurgitating all this information, these data points, and for that leader, they're like, what is this? How does this apply to me? Right. So first understanding, what is the takeaway for that leader? What do we need to influence at this point in time? And it may change throughout the search. Be able to say, okay, today we need to be focusing on the pipeline analytics, right? Because this is where we're seeing some trouble. But then maybe it's moving into market intelligence type data and that type of stuff. So I think it's really understanding, again, what is it that we're trying to influence, bring data that supports that to the table, and how are you actually presenting that data to them? So there's been times where we've actually prepared kind of decks, or kind of hiring strategy decks that we presented ahead of time to say, hey, review this. We're going to review it at our next meeting, and want to dig deeper with you on some of these things and how I think we can kind of impact our results. And then it sets the stage a little bit, especially with those leaders. They have a very short amount of time generally, and you have to be clear, concise, and really, what does it mean for them? So I think being really understanding the data. There's a lot of data out there, and the great thing about data, you can manipulate data in many different ways to be able to help influence or show or move the trigger, right? But how you're bringing that to the table and how you're actually presenting that to those leaders is going to be very important. So know what you're talking about before you start
Yeah.
just bringing data to the table.
Understanding the why behind each set
Mm-hmm.
of data. Let's talk about the future, a bit of futurology here. So the future
Mm-hmm.
of talent advisory. What trends do you see shaping the future of talent acquisition and advisory?
I definitely think AI and automations, we know that's out there,
Yeah.
right? If you can't
Yeah.
jump on board with AI, you're going to be left behind. So how are you bringing that into your everyday, whether it's using it from a administrative functional standpoint and helping write job descriptions or outreach letters or whatever it is with some of the tools. But then again, what does your current tech stack look like to be able to bring in AI into your process, right? And so that's really dependent upon who you're utilizing. There's so many different things coming. I think every ATS system now is trying to jump on board with some sort of new AI function, right? But think about
Yeah.
how can you leverage that, but becoming smart with that, right? It's not about taking away from your role, but it's really about how can it help you be more proactive in your process. I think the other piece is that kind of talent density and skills based hiring, right? We're moving more towards, again, what skills, and understand that kind of in your process when you're doing that kind of kickoff meeting with your leaders, rather than just saying, okay, what do you want in this role? Like, dig deeper. Where are the skill gaps that you have currently? Do you see that changing? Also using that information to think about future, right? So again, not just maybe for this role today, but if we fill this role, what would this mean for your team? Do you still think you'd have skill gaps in any other way 3, 6, 9 months down the road? Which kind of brings me into the last point, which is more so around that proactive workforce planning, right? We have to be better at being more proactive in pipelining and thinking about, again, getting out of that reactive mode, but how are we building out these pipelines? So again, people that we may talk to today and you think they'd be amazing for your organization, they may not be a fit for this role right now, but they
Yeah.
could be an amazing person in the future. So really digging into that, proactive planning, thinking about that candidate experience. So as those folks you are engaging, you're still providing an amazing experience so that they want to come back to your company.
I think pipelining and talent pool building is all intrinsically linked to employer brand these days.
Yes.
I think gone are the days where you actually build talent pools and it's been replaced with you just build an attractive employer brand. So when you are reaching out to the candidates, they have
Mm-hmm.
had 6 months of watching, your LinkedIn company page put out really insightful videos of the
Yep.
culture, selling the company as a place that they want to work for. So when you're reaching out cold as a recruiter headhunting, it's not cold. They
Right.
get back to you and say, yeah, I've heard about your company for the past 6 months. I'd love to explore you're working there, what roles have you got that will suit us? And going back
Yeah.
to the AI piece, there are so many AI tools out there. For me personally, it's overwhelming. I'm getting messages all the
Hmm.
time from various different AI companies. Some I've had amazing conversations with. I'm speaking to a couple of CEOs and founders of AI systems. Some not so great. Some AI tools that I demoed in the last couple of months have been dreadful. And I've just
Yeah.
thought I shouldn't really say too much, but some have made me think, if I include this into my TA process, we're in a lot of trouble. How can recruiters prepare now for the evolving demands of the role?
Yeah, I mean, I think as recruiters, we need to get into that, stop waiting for someone to tell me to do something, right? You have to want to own kind of that next step. You have to step into that, advisory role yourself. A lot of this maybe it's you need to learn. So maybe it's taking some classes either on AI, networking with other folks that are doing things differently, tapping in with your current team or leaders and asking those questions. Maybe it's taking a step back and looking at your process and helping to come up with new solutions, right? So I think you have to be proactive in your own, role and not wait for the business to tell you to change. So I think that's one thing. I think, again, going back to knowing your business, attend company meetings, attend department meetings, ask to have a seat at the table, right?
Yeah.
So they're not always going to tell you, hey, I think you should come to this meeting, Nicole, right? Then how do you show up when you are there? Are you asking questions? Are you actively listening? When you attend those meetings, are you taking notes and then going back and, utilizing that to either dig deeper or using it in your strategy, right? We have to actually start thinking more of again, just a consultant, right? What is the job? What are we trying to, not just what is the job, but what are we trying to actually solve for by hiring this person? So it's that kind of change in mindset of thinking about, this is what we need to be doing. I think, for recruiters, if you're kind of on that cusp and you're wondering, how do I continue to level up? I think it's taking some of these points today and looking at your process and am I doing these things? Am I learning more every day about the business? Do I feel comfortable to talk about data? Am I using AI or not? Right. And I think those are some little things they can start to kind of self-evaluate on and then put together your own strategy to say, here's what I need to do personally to level myself up and then move forward.
I agree with everything there. And so just to wrap up, Nicole, a couple more questions, just sort
Yeah.
of actionable takeaways for our listeners. So question from me here. The market right now is awash with candidates, right? So I would
Hmm.
personally say that the pain points for scaling companies right now isn't finding candidates. And this is potentially for the benefit of recruitment agencies listening, right?
Yeah.
Because as I've said, when they contact, when they reach out, it's the pain point is always, we can find you candidates, we can find you candidates. I wouldn't say that that's a pain point right now.
No.
What would you say is the pain point for TA teams and scaling companies in 2025?
It's finding the quality candidates. It's finding the candidates that are going to fit within the culture of that company, that are going to help move the needle or move that company forward, right? They have the skill sets, and not just even from a knowledge standpoint. Again, it's going to depend on every role, but what is that person going to be bringing to the table, right? Like, are they the right person on the right bus? And so I think with agencies particularly, you can't just throw people over the line. Like you said, I mean, I had someone last week that said, we have this job posted. We're only going to have it posted for maybe even 4 or 5 days, because in 5 days, we already have 500 applicants. And so it's not about having people actually apply or be aware of the role. It's really having quality people apply and
Yeah.
be aware of the role, right? And so I think that's it's changing even that selling point to companies as an agency to show the value and show who you're bringing to the table. And I get that's probably sometimes a hard, hard kind of road to get into, right? As far as like making that partnership with that company. But I think you have to talk the talk of the company, and
Yeah.
also make sure you're going to the person that can make a decision on whether or not to use an agency. If you're reaching out to a bunch of recruiters, they may not have the decision making power to say, I want to go use an agency. Most of them don't. It's really thinking about the leaders, right? and where is the gaps that maybe they're finding, or what kind of data or something that you can bring to the table to show you can have impact versus staying just internally.
It comes back to what you were saying earlier about whether you're an agency recruiter or an internal recruiter, about understanding the business to understand what good looks like in a candidate. And I think it's always been like this. And agencies need to be better at screening out candidates because they're commission driven. I found that agencies don't tend to screen out candidates, and they would send you a 4 out of 10 candidate and hope it would. So, yeah, you're right. It's not the amount of candidates, it's the amount of quality
Quality.
candidates that agencies are providing. Final question here.
Yeah.
Final couple of questions. You've spoken about this at great length for the past sort of half an hour, but what would you say, just a quick bullet point recap, what would you say are the top 3 things that recruiters can start doing today to become better talent advisors?
I think it goes back to I think a big theme here is, one, know your business, right? Get out there, understand the business. I think you also have to have the drive to want to be a talent advisor. I think there are probably still some recruiters that are, it's a numbers game. They're looking at their role as a numbers game. You have to want to shift your mindset to move into that. And that's going to mean maybe learning more. It's going to mean slowing down potentially a little bit, right? And saying, okay, I'm going to put more into this search. I'm going to go into that strategy session and I'm going to be prepared with some market intelligence. I'm going to have some questions I'm asking, but I'm also going to go in there already, have read the job description, understand about that department or whatever else it may be. So how you show up, I think, is really, really key, but you have to want that and want your role to be involved into that. And then lastly, I think you have to continue to get more knowledgeable around the data in intelligence, data, again, market mapping, whether it be your pipeline analytics, but really understanding beyond, just the day to day, but understanding where we're getting applicants from, how they're moving through our process, what do those timelines look like, become really educated and be able to speak with a data mindset is really, really key.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Nicole. Final question.
Yes.
Where can listeners learn more about this topic and connect with yourself?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, you can connect with me. Just look up Nicole Carriere. I'm hoping to work on some new projects coming soon, so stay tuned there. I will be launching some new stuff around this topic, around being a little bit more mindful in TA. My previous life, I call it. I actually am a yoga instructor as well, and owned a yoga studio. And so bridging kind of some of the mindfulness pieces I've learned from there and running my own business into TA is kind of my next passion project. But beyond that too, really good resource in someone that or a company that I followed is Recruiting Toolbox, if you haven't heard of that before. But if you type in talentadvisor.com, they have a really good, like, some couple of little cheat sheets too on what if you're just basically a order taker today versus a talent advisor. It asks some really, really good questions in there. I highly recommend it. John on there, the owner, has a good recording on there too about being a talent advisor if you really want to dig deeper. And I just love the way that he kind of presents. So I would recommend kind of going there as well. And Hung Lee as well. And it has a great, has some really great insights and some stuff on his newsletters and such. So those are some areas I would also recommend. But there's a lot out there today. So I think it's being proactive, network. If anyone wants to kind of chat with me about this, I'm happy to have kind of a coffee chat. So feel free to reach out. Yeah. Exciting time.
And just on that, with the TotallyTA community, I would actually love to have you as a special guest. We put on lots of events on monthly. It would be good if you wanted to run an event on the topic of your choice around this, and have it, as I say, have you on as a special guest. So let's chat offline about that, of course. But thank you so much for your time, Nicole. It's been really, really great talking to you. And we'll catch up soon.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right.